The dead world had a name once. Now the survey logs just called it Anchor, because it was the last solid ground for 9 light years in any direction, and because the word meant something to the people who'd come to die on it. Mara Vesky was wiring a charge into the bones of a derelict harvester when the sky cracked open above the ridge. She didn't look up right away. Looking up was a habit that got people killed, and she'd buried enough of them already. She finished the splice, taped the lead, and only then tilted her head back to watch the Sarn dropship come down through the ash like a blade through wet paper. "That's the third one this week," said Petrov, crouched beside her, hands black to the wrist. He was her brother in everything but blood. They'd grown up in the same orphan corridor on the same dying station, and that counted for more than a shared name ever could. "They're not surveying anymore. They're digging." "Let them dig." Mara wiped her face with the back of her glove and left a smear of grease across her cheekbone. "There's nothing down there but us." That was the lie the colony told itself, and she'd told it so often she half believed it. The truth was buried under 400 meters of basalt, in a vault the first settlers had sealed and then erased from every map they carried, so that the location would die with the people who knew it. They had understood something Mara was only beginning to, that some things are safer lost than found. The Sarn had come for what was in that vault, they just didn't know where it was, yet. Petrov found it 3 days later. He hadn't meant to. He'd been scavenging the old settler tunnels for copper, the way they all did, and a floor that had held for 2 centuries chose that afternoon to stop holding. Mara pulled him out of the collapse with a broken wrist and a grin that didn't match the break, and in his good hand he held a disc of dark metal no bigger than a coin, warm to the touch, humming a frequency she felt in her teeth. "It showed me things," he said, while the colony medic splinted him. "When I touched it, it showed me how to move." She thought he was concussed. She was wrong, and she would spend the rest of her life wishing she'd been right, because Petrov walked into the settlement's trade post the next morning to ask the old prospectors what the disc was, and the Sarn had a listener in that room. By nightfall they knew the vault was real. By the morning after, Petrov was dead in the ash with a Sarn burned through his chest, and the disc was gone from his pocket. Except it wasn't, because Mara had taken it off his body the night before, the way you take a thing that belonged to someone you loved, not knowing it was the only reason any of them would survive. She didn't cry at the burning. The colony watched her not cry and understood and loved her a little more for it. Then she went home, sat on the floor of the room she'd shared with him, and closed her bare hand around the disc. It showed her things. Not a vision, a memory that wasn't hers, a memory of asterisk movement asterisk, of weight shifting, of the precise geometry of a body in a fight, repeated and repeated until her own muscles ached with the ghost of practice she'd never done. The settlers hadn't built a weapon, they'd built a teacher. Every fighter who had ever held this disc had poured what they knew into it, and now it was pouring back, into her, in the dark, while outside the Sarn lined their dropships up along the ridge like teeth in a jaw. The man who led them called himself Koryal. She met him at the perimeter fence 11 days into the siege because he asked to meet her, and because refusing would have cost the colony its water line. He came alone, which was its own kind of message. The Sarn were tall and gray and moved like something poured rather than born, but Koryal had spent so long among humans that he'd learned to wear them. A pale, immaculate coat that never seemed to take the ash, boots polished to a wet shine, a way of folding his long hands that was almost graceful. He looked, Mara thought, like a man who had never once in his life had to kneel in the mud. "You have a relic of mine," he said. His translated voice was smooth as poured oil. "I'd like it returned. In exchange, your colony lives. It's a generous trade. I'd encourage you to recognize that. It's not yours. It is no one's. It is a tool, and tools belong to whoever can use them." He studied her the way a man studies weather. "You can't use it. You're a mechanic. Give me the relic, Mara Vesky, and go back to your wires." She gave him nothing. She walked back through the gate, and behind her she heard him sigh, a small, patient, disappointed sound, the sound of a man certain he would win and merely irritated at the delay. That night the Sarn took the eastern scrapyards, and Mara learned what the disc had truly given her. They sent 6. They expected to walk in. The scrapyards were a cathedral of dead machines. Harvesters and dropships and colony haulers stacked 5 high in teetering canyons of rust, and Mara knew every unstable beam of it because she had spent her whole life keeping things like it from falling. She let the Sarn come in deep. Then she started cutting the welds she'd spent 2 days secretly weakening, and 3,000 tons of derelict steel came down the canyon like a closing fist. The 2 who lived through that found her on the stacks, and the thing the disc had poured into her woke up. She would never be able to describe it afterward. Her body simply knew the half-second before the gray hand closed, knew how to fold her weight under the blow and let the Sarn's own mass carry it past her, knew the brutal economy of an elbow against a throat that did not have a human throat's protections. She fought the way 2 centuries of dead settlers had taught the disc to fight. The wreckage shifted under her with every movement, a whole canyon of dead steel groaning and tilting, and she used it. She had spent her life learning which beam would hold and which would betray, and now she made the Sarn stand on the betraying ones. A harvester wing the size of a house slid loose beneath one of them and folded him into the rust. The other came up a stack of stacked haulers after her, fast, too fast, and she met him on the highest plate with the ash blowing sideways between them and the whole tower swaying like a ship. For a moment they only stood there, breathing, 20 meters above the ground on a square of metal that did not want to hold them both. He was bleeding from somewhere. So was she. And she saw the thing in his flat gray eyes that she would see again and again in the days to come, the small, total surprise of a creature discovering that the prey had teeth. When it was over, she was standing alone on the wobbling tower with her knuckles split and her brother's killers still and cooling below her. And she was breathing. And they were not. She did not feel triumphant. She felt like a tool that had finally been used. The colony's monk found her at dawn. They called him a monk for lack of a better word. Old Brother Aday had been a field surgeon once, in a war nobody remembered, and somewhere in the wreck of it he traded medicine for something quieter. He had no church. He had a greenhouse, a low dome of salvaged glass where he grew bitter green things in the planet's poisoned soil, and he found Mara there because that was where the hurt people went. "You're going to lose if you keep fighting like you have something to prove," he said, pressing a poultice of his bitter leaves against the burn along her ribs. It stung, then it didn't, then the pain pulled back like a tide. The relic teaches the hands. It does not teach the reason. A fighter without a reason is just a machine that bleeds. "My reason is in the ash by the ridge," Mara said. "Revenge is a reason that runs out. A day tied off the wrap. Find one that doesn't." She didn't answer him, but she came back to the greenhouse again and again over the long siege, every time the Sarn beat her down, and they did beat her down because Coriol learned. He stopped sending 6. He sent 40. He drove the colony back from the scrapyards, back from the water line, back into the cratered heart of the settlement. And each time Mara fought, and each time she was carried into the green dome half-broken, and each time Aday's bitter leaves pulled her back from the edge, and his quiet questions pushed her toward an answer she didn't want to find. It became a rhythm she could have set a clock by. The Sarn would take ground. Mara would meet them on it, and the disc would move her hands, and she would account for more of them than any human had a right to, and then the numbers would simply outlast her, because 40 is more than 1 no matter how the one fights. They would carry her back through the gate with something broken or something burned, and the colony would part to let her through without a word, and Brother Aday would already have the kettle on and the bitter leaves crushed, because he had learned the rhythm too. He never told her she'd done well. He never told her she'd done badly. He pressed the green against the hurt and waited for her breathing to slow, and then, only then, asked her something small and impossible to answer, and sent her back out to do it again. The disc made her the best fighter the colony had. It could not make her enough of them. There was a place she fought him once that she would not forget. Beyond the eastern fence, where the planet's old before time still showed through, stood a grove of dead trees, ash-gray, leafless, 2 centuries petrified, the only standing things on a flat horizon. Coriol sent 4 of his best after her through that grove, and the fight moved among the pale trunks slow and almost quiet. No canyon of falling steel here, just her body and theirs, and the soft gray dust that rose with every step and hung in the still air like smoke that would not clear. She fought them one at a time because the trees made them come one at a time, and the disc's borrowed knowledge turned each trunk into a wall, each root into a trap. When the last of the 4 went down, she stood among the petrified trees in the settling dust, and for a moment the grove was so silent she could hear the disc humming in her chest. Then she walked home through it, and the dust closed over her footprints, and it was as if no one had been there at all. Coriol heard about the grove. After that he stopped sending his best because his best kept not coming back. He sent numbers instead. By the 90th day, there were 211 humans left alive on Anchor, and Coriol held everything but the vault. He held it the way a man holds a card he's already decided to play. And on the 91st day, he sent his offer through the wire one final time, and this time it was not generous. The relic and the vault's location by dawn, or the green dome first. He had learned what the greenhouse meant to them, and then the rest. Mara took the disc to Brother Aday's dome that night. She found him watering the bitter leaves in the dark, and she stood among the green and the glass and finally asked the question she'd been carrying since the burning. Before that, though, she had gone to the edge of the world. There was a place at the rim of the settlement where the basalt simply ended, a cliff, and below it the dry channel of a river that had not run in 10,000 years, a vast pale scar of stone winding off toward a horizon the color of old bone. The first settlers had built nothing there. It was just an edge. Mara went to it on the 90th night because she could not bear the colony's eyes, and she sat with her legs over the drop and the disc warm in her fist and tried to find, the way Aday kept telling her to, a reason that would not run out. She thought about Petrov. The reason ran out. She thought about the grove and the scrapyards and the 211 faces at the fence, and somewhere down there in the dark of the dead river, it stopped running out. It was not the dead she was fighting for. It had never been the dead. It was the planting Aday wanted to do. It was the row of bitter green leaves that could be. It was the thing the settlers had sealed in the vault, not a prize, not a weapon, but a future, kept alive by people who would never see it the way the disc kept skill alive past the death of the hands that owned it. That was the reason. You did not fight to avenge what was lost. You fought to plant what wasn't there yet. She came down off the cliff at midnight and went to find the monk. Mara took the disc to Brother Aday's dome. She found him watering the bitter leaves in the dark, and she stood among the green and the glass, and finally asked the question she'd been carrying since the burning. "What's in the vault, Aday? You're old enough to know." The old man was quiet for a long while. Then, seeds, he let the word sit. Not weapons, seeds and soil and the patterns to wake a dead world up. The first settlers came here to grow something, Mara. The relic you carry, it wasn't built to make soldiers. It was built so that the knowledge of how to do hard things would never die with the people who learned it. They turned it into a teacher of fighting only when the killing started. Before that, it taught planting. It taught surgery. He touched a bitter leaf with one finger. It taught me. Mara looked down at the disc in her palm, warm, humming, full of 200 years of human hands. And she understood, finally, what Coriol could not compute, what no sarn coat poured smooth over no sarn bones would ever be able to compute. He thought the relic was a weapon, and the vault a prize, because to him a tool belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. He had spent 91 days trying to win the disc. He had never once imagined someone would simply give it away. At dawn she walked out through the gate alone, the way he had once walked to her, and she carried the disc in her open hand where he could see it. Coriol came down from the ridge to meet her, immaculate, unhurried, his pale coat still somehow clean. Behind him 40 Sarn. Behind her the colony, at the fence, at the broken windows, on the wreckage, 211 people watching their mechanic walk toward the gray. "You're being sensible," Coriol said, finally. "I'm giving you the relic," Mara said. "All of it, everything it knows." And she pressed the disc flat against his open gray palm and triggered the splice. She had spent the night with Brother Aday and the disc and a soldering iron, and she had not been wiring a weapon, because the disc had never been a weapon. She had been wiring a teacher. The disc did to Coriol what it had done to her in the dark of her brother's room. It poured. It poured 2 centuries of human memory into a mind that had spent its whole life certain that a tool belonged to whoever was strong enough to hold it. And now the tool was holding him, and what it taught was not how to fight. It taught him the weight of a thing built by people who knew they would die and built it anyway, so the ones who came after wouldn't have to start from nothing. It taught him the orphan corridor and the shared station, and the brother in everything but blood. It taught him a poultice of bitter leaves pressed to a stranger's burn. It taught him, all at once and without mercy, what it was to belong to something rather than to own it. And a Sarn mind, poured smooth and certain and alone, had nothing in it that could hold that weight. Coriol's immaculate knees hit the ash. He knelt in the mud he had never once knelt in, both gray hands pressed to a disc he could not let go of, and the smooth oil voice was making a sound now that no translator had a word for. His 40 soldiers did not move. They had no orders for this. Their commander was on the ground, learning, and there was nothing in their long gray lives that told them what a leader looked like when he was being taught to be a person. Mara crouched in front of him, the way Aday had crouched in front of her. "It runs out," she said quietly. "Revenge, conquest, taking. It always runs out, and then you're just a machine that bleeds." She reached out and almost gently closed his shaking hands more firmly around the disc. "That's the last thing it'll teach you. The rest is yours to do something with." The Sarn left Anchor that season. Not all at once, and not because they were beaten. The colony could never have beaten them, and every soul behind that fence knew it. They left the way a man leaves a room when he has finally understood he was never welcome in it, and at the front of them went Coriol, who did not wear his pale coat anymore, and who carried the disc back down to his dropship held in 2 hands like something that did not belong to him. Brother Aday opened the vault in the spring. There were seeds inside and soil, and the patient patterns for waking a dead world up, exactly as he'd said. The colony carried them out into the ash by the ridge, out past the place where Petrov was buried, and they began, 211 of them and then more, the slow, stubborn work of making something live where nothing had. Mara planted the first row herself, bitter green leaves from Aday's dome, and as she pressed each seed into the poisoned ground she found she was humming, a tune with no name, the one the orphan corridor mothers used to hum over the children who had no one else, the smallest and most human thing she owned. She hummed it over the dirt. She hummed it because her hands knew the work now, and her reason, at last, was something that would not run out. Above her the sky was just a sky, and the world had a name. It was Anchor because it was solid ground, and because the word meant something to the people who had decided, against every sensible thing, to live.